Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Making the Argument. I'm actually here in New York City before the communist takeover is finalized. I decided it would be good to come up here before I required papers. But we have our next guests on the whole series of What Should the Right Want? And I am very excited to be talking to, I hope I can call my good friends, Konstantin and Freitas from Triggernometry. Thank you guys for being on.
Oh, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure, man.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
We are incredibly unqualified, by the way, to appear on this podcast for two reasons. A, we're not American, and B, I also don't think that we would say that we're on the right either. So we are outsiders in every way, telling you exactly how to live your lives. You love that over here in America. When the British come over and tell you what to do.
We love it when they come over and try, and then we send them back. Well, no, the reason why I wanted to do this is, one, you guys have engaged in this debate quite a bit. And even if you don't consider yourselves on the right, I would say that you certainly understand elements of right-wing ideology, kind of the full spectrum of that. And the whole purpose of this discussion, and discussions I've had with Doug Wilson and James Lindsay and others, is trying to get beyond just what we're opposed to and actually providing some sort of coherent direction of where we want to go, because we can already see the right fracturing quite a bit right now. It's starting to get pretty hostile, and I would argue that it's getting hostile on the right in ways that we could argue are necessary, but are also highly destructive, because we still have a threat out there. We still have people that want to defeat all of us, and the question is can we come up with something that addresses all the various concerns of some of the main groups within the right, and get to some place that we can all agree is worth going to, rather than just agreeing on what we want to destroy or what we want to defeat. So I'm going to give you guys I'm going to frame this up. I'm going to give you guys kind of these three broad categories, and what I'd like you to do is kind of tell me maybe where you guys think you might fit. Because again, this is not a fight just for what's going on in America. This is a fight for Western civilization. And you guys are having to fight this in a very, very unique way in the UK right now, which we're seeing portions of it right now start to come into the United States and become more prominent. So in a way, it almost feels like we're looking into our future a little bit. But these three categories are this. There's the category of what we might call the co-belligerents against wokeism. One category is, I didn't leave the left left me, right? You see this a lot. You see this with Barry Weiss. You see this with Elon Musk, where they're just saying, look, I'm not a conservative. I'm not on the right. Right, I was always, center left. It's just that the left ran so far and decided I was the enemy. And oh, by the way, I kind of like freedom of speech and the scientific method, and I don't believe that the laws of logic are a tool of the patriarchy. Right. So look, as soon as you want to reset back to 2010, we're good to go. Right. That's one category on this. The second category is more of, these are the people that really are rooted in what we might call the classical liberal tradition. They believe in private property rights and representative government and limiting the powers of government. These are the people that they get a lot of their ideology from the Scottish common sense element of the Enlightenment, John Locke, Montesquieu. They look at our founders and they say, look, our founders got it right. We're the ones that just screwed it up. We just need to kind of, obviously we don't want to go back to slavery or things like that, but we want to reset to this idea of, hey, the fundamental principles in the Declaration of Independence, the fundamental ideas that informed like the American Republic, or even the Magna Carta and the traditions within the UK, these were basically correct. We just need to be more faithful to them, and so let's make the adjustments. Then you have this third category. Now there's elements of this third category that are I'm not really including, right? We could have a whole fourth category. But this third category, I would say, are the ones that they're saying, yeah, I think it's deeper than that. I think we need to start questioning classical liberalism. I think we need to start questioning some of the core tenets of the Enlightenment. Maybe these universal principles that we thought were true are not so universal. Maybe they are cultural. Maybe they are regional. Maybe they are rooted in thousands of years of tradition, that you can't just invite someone to your country and automatically, well, they're an American or they're an Englishman because they happen to be a citizen. And these are the ones that they're open to very, very different suggestions. They don't want to just reset to parliamentary democracy or to the constitutional republic that we have in the United States. They're saying, no, maybe we need a little bit more heavy-handed government in certain categories. Maybe we need more advocacy for a certain way of life and not just leave it up to neutral forces. So those are the three categories. Those are the three categories. And the first question I always like to ask is, as you think about those categories, is there one that you more closely associate with?
For me, it would be a blend of the first two, I think.
The first two. So they just reset to 2010 and the classical liberal tradition is...
With some modifications. I mean, maybe Francis should answer first and I can then go into the nuance.
So I think I started off with the left. I didn't leave the left left me.
But now we're making good money, so we believe, so we believe in small government.
Exactly.
Oh, and the Second Amendment, because you want to protect the money.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much summed me up.
Yeah.
Let me give you a little bit of background. So we're from the UK. What we're seeing in the UK is post-October 7th is the unmasking of radical Islam and how much it's infiltrated in the UK society, UK population, UK politics. And as a result of this ideology making its way through our country, they are using liberal traditions and subverting them. And so when they're using essentially what is the bedrock of our civilization, what we all take to be true, and then manipulating it and using it against us, which is why I started out on that particular, I didn't leave the left me, and I'm looking at the third and category and thinking to myself, well, 5 years ago, there's no way I would have thought about that category. In fact, I don't know a whole lot about it, but the moment you started explaining it to me, I thought, well, actually, if in the UK we're going to ban hate preachers, which I think is the only way to do this. I'm thinking, are we going to have to ban halal? And we're going to have to ban all types of, things like kosher. And you're looking at it in order to get some kind of harmony, because otherwise we're not going to be able to deal with the problem of radical Islam. Then maybe I'm going to be more in that category. And maybe that category has become more relevant because we're a society that is not homogenous anymore, certainly not culturally or religiously.
Well, this is the point I was going to make. I don't know if you want to delve this deeply into this.
No, this is great because because I will tell you, this is the thing. This is the reason why there's a lot of people that are very uncomfortable with this third category.
Yeah.
Right, and for good reason, because there's some people in that category that I'm uncomfortable with, but there's others where, like, they're worth listening to. They're making good points.
This is a conversation worth having.
Yes.
I 100% agree with you. So, but I also think, let's also be honest, right? That third category, it comprises different types of people.
Yeah.
For example, we have had Curtis Yarvin on the show, right? Yeah. But Curtis Yarvin and Nick Fuentes, if those are the only three categories available, they probably go in that third category together.
Yeah.
But they're different figures.
Well, and let me just say that, like, I'm not. I think Fuentes would have a completely different category.
Right.
So let's just clarify that. But I'm not.
Because what I would say is, at least from my perspective as an outsider on both counts, is that what's happening on the right, first and foremost, is actually not about those three categories in this moment. The first battle that is being fought is the normalization of the Nick Fuentes type of thing within the broad spectrum of the conversation on the right. Is that something we're going to tolerate or not? Yeah. And that's the battles that's actually being fought, first and foremost, in this moment as we record this. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But in terms of the other stuff within those three categories and how do you deal with it, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about, are human beings ultimately all equally receptive to classically liberal values? And if you take a man from rural Pakistan and transport him into Britain, or you transport him into America, does he automatically become British and American? And my answer to that is quite nuanced, because I believe that actually, yes, provided certain things are in place. Number one is the host society has a strong sense of what its values are and is willing to teach them forcefully to everybody. And you guys do a much better job of this than we do.
This is like the assimilation concept.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right? Number two, people, generally speaking, if you look at the history of migration, Thomas Sowell has written on this very extensively. People don't migrate individually and then come and just assimilate naturally into the society. I am an immigrant to Britain. My parents sent me to boarding school. They didn't immigrate themselves, and I was kind of thrown into, here's this society, you're kind of on your own. There's a structure for you to be part of. I don't claim to be an Englishman, but I am British in my values, in my humor, I also have some things from my Russian background that I've inherited as well, which are actually kind of useful. But I don't think any reasonable person would look at me and say, well, there's a failure of integration.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you had 4 million people from rural parts of Eastern Europe migrate together into ghettoized communities in the north of England, they would create or maintain their own subculture. Now, if you then say, well, it's not Eastern Europe, it's rural Pakistan, and you add a totally different religious, cultural, and religious, very important background, and those people are not only allowed, but kind of encouraged to not integrate.
Yeah.
Life is made easier for people who don't integrate. In the UK now, if you go to a doctor, you're going to get a leaflet in 100 languages, right? Like, that's not encouraging people to integrate. Intermarriage, marrying your cousin is still legal in the UK, which obviously creates this clannish system of doing things. So I think the answer is, certainly for the United States, from an outsider's perspective, is do not repeat the mistakes we made in Britain. Do not repeat the mistakes that were made in Europe. That is to say that immigrants, in the same way that, the Fukuyamas of the world believe that the moment, all you need is economic prosperity and suddenly everyone becomes democratic. No, and just like arriving on the shores of the United States clearly doesn't just make you an American. So you have to be incredibly strategic with your immigration policy and only allow people in who you think have a good, strong chance of contributing and integrating.
So can I stop you there? Because this has been a common theme where I've actually seen a lot of the people that I've seen tearing each other to pieces on X all seem to agree on this central theme.
Right.
And that is this idea of just mass immigration.
Doesn't work.
That multiculturalism is something that you can experience provided, or something that can be beneficial to a society within a very, very limited spectrum. And that is, you have a society with a dominant culture. And this goes back to what you were saying, where you have a society, you have a culture which has a very strong sense of itself. It's very high trust, and it's also protective of its cultural traditions. The United States used to be a pretty good example of this, where if you came to the United States, you were coming because you wanted to be an American. It wasn't just economic benefits. You wanted to be American. A lot of times you were fleeing something, and so you were grateful for showing up here. But there was a very strong sense of, you want to be an American, and that means something. And we have certain principles and ideals and whatnot. And over time, we've lost some of that. There isn't the same consensus that we have on what it means to be an American, and as a result, with mass immigration, we have some problems. What I've struggled with, right, is growing up in that classical liberal tradition where it's like, no, these ideals are universal. Representative government, free market economics, these are universal positives. Look at the wonderful things that they have produced, and look at the wonderful example of people from other cultures coming into this environment and integrating well. And now that seems to be being challenged. Do you think it's just because it almost sounds you're saying, well, no, I do believe in the somewhat universality of these principles, but there's no question that you don't just arrive on the shore. You have to have a very, very specific immigration policy that protects those cultural institutions and ideas.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you eating enough steak? Don't bother replying. The answer is no. You need more. And the place to get it is Good Ranchers. Why? Well, because with Good Ranchers, you're going to get something that comes from local farms. That's right. No, one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, are you eating enough steak? The answer is no. You're never eating enough steak, but Good Ranchers can help. And that's the sort of helpful people they are. Because when you get Good Ranchers, you are getting only the best American-raised beef, pork, poultry, and wild-caught seafood. That's right. And with none of the hidden additives that you get in other meats, right? None of the antibiotics, no added hormones, no seed oils, none of that stuff. You're just getting the genuine article delivered directly to your home. And with the holidays around the corner, it's not just good for you and your family, but good for your friends and extended family as gifts. Get them something they'll actually be excited about. And here's the really excited part. If you order by December 1st and you use my exclusive code Nick, you'll get an extra $100 off your first 3 orders. That's right. It's $100 off your first 3 orders plus free meat at goodranchers.com with your own subscription. So go over there right now to goodranchers.com. Use my code Nick. If you want to support a great company, if you want to support our show, and you want to make sure people have an absolutely excellent Christmas, this is the gift you and all of your friends and family have been waiting for. Goodranchers.com. Use promo code Nick. Get all of those offers. I promise you, you're going to love it.
Here's my question, though. The libertarian side of this debate will come in and be like, oh, so you want big government to come in and interrupt with the flow of...
I don't want big government. I want strong government.
Stronger, okay.
There's a big difference between those two.
So
a strong government is a government that doesn't fluff these important conversations. I don't want a gigantic Department of Education.
Yeah.
What I want, though, is for people to recognize that immigration, when it comes in large clusters from different parts of the world, comes with different value sets. And you mentioned multiculturalism. My view, and it's important to distinguish between the two, there's a multi-ethnic society. That's a society in which you have black people, brown people, white people. And there's a multicultural society in which inevitably you get to the point where all cultures are equal.
Yeah, which is garbage.
That doesn't, and that just simply does not work. The reason America, as an outsider, in my opinion, has worked as well as it has, is that immigrants from past generations would come here. What would they do? Number one, they would teach their children, we are now American. A lot of them would change their names to become more Americanized. A lot of them would no longer speak the language of their home country at home with their children, to encourage their children to integrate. To the point now where there are Italian Americans, but are there ghettos of Italian Americans?
Yeah.
Are there ghettos of Irish Americans? Are there neighborhoods where you can only be elected, or big if you're Italian?
Yeah.
Not really, right? So that is the destination. And the question is, are all cultures equally capable of getting there? And I would put it to you, our experience in Europe is that unless you are very, very, very forceful about breaking up the ghettos that automatically get created when people migrate in large numbers, probably not. And then that means you do have to violate an element of the classical liberal thing, which is, all people are the same or all people are equal. They're not. And you have to start recognizing that if you're going to save your country.
Yeah. I think we've... one of the things that's been interesting is you look at the immigration issue in the UK versus the immigration in the United States. It's very different. It's similar that we have massive problems with illegal immigration. But I'm looking at the numbers and I'm seeing this, the numbers from North Africa, from the Middle East, and even from places like Albania, where you go look at the British prison system and it's pretty easy to see where the main problem spots are happening. Then when you had things like the various grooming gangs that were taking place in the UK, there's no denying that there is a connection there, a cultural connection there between the way one culture views young British girls and versus the way Britain views their young girls. And it was amazing to watch this almost slavish response coming from elements of the classical liberal tradition, which, more on the woke, more on the progressive side, but still of that classical liberal tradition, that were just insisting that, well, how dare you? When you look at these numbers over here, we see that there's a small, and everyone is looking at them like, are you insane? Like there is very clearly a connection here. It's a connection they don't deny in more honest conversations. So why is it that we're not allowed to have that conversation? And it immediately goes back to, well, because if you do that, you're violating this universal principle that all people are equal. And I think some of the response here is, well, no, I can believe that all people are equal in the sense that they have equal value before God, that they should have equal protection before the law to the extent that they fall within the jurisdiction of that law. But cultures are not equal. They don't give the same answers to all the same existential questions that we face. So why do you think Because this has become a major source of, again, all three of these categories. A lot of infighting about where we should go, what we should do, but they've all seemed to kind of agreed on this point that there was a fundamental flaw in this kind of, maybe you might even say overly libertarian interpretation, which is just, oh yeah, the free flow of goods and people, and when we'll all be happy. Do you think the main sticking point, as it differentiates between Western civilization in Europe and specifically in the UK, has, again, we have a lot of Hispanic people coming in the United States, but there's a lot of actually shared values there. Not all. There's definitely different cultural things that are manifesting themselves. But Catholic versus a largely Protestant nation, traditional family structures, traditional ideas of what husbands and wives should do and raising kids and working hard and all of that. And then all of a sudden you go to Dearborn, Michigan, or you go into Minnesota right now and you look at some of the things happening there. It's like, whoa, how is this ever going to be assimilated? And it's large of it is Islamist. Like I have people that I served with in the military who are Muslim, who are very, very proud Americans. And I will have people, well, that's because they're not properly following their faith. I'm like, okay, I'm happy to have that conversation. But one thing I have noticed is that the more people, if they get their primary identity from Islam, there seems to be a general incompatibility with the very classical liberalism that is, like to your, inviting people here that are not interested in assimilating. Is that a fair representation of what's been happening in the UK? Is that the type of immigrants coming are, by virtue of their culture and their religious faith, not interested in assimilating into English culture or British culture?
These are generalized statements, of course.
Yes.
So it's difficult to talk about it without being nuanced. But I think if we're being really honest, Nick, and I think this is just a statement of fact, a lot of people don't like to say it because it makes people uncomfortable. No one in Europe gives a shit about mass immigration. It's
really?
Not really. Not really. We let in hundreds across the continent of Europe, millions of Ukrainians. Where are the Ukrainian crime waves? We let in hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers into Britain. Did that affect Britain? British people are not concerned about Hong Kongers or Ukrainians. The problem in Europe is Islam. That's what people are really fearful of. And that's what's going on. I was
listening to you guys' interview with Tommy Robinson. It was a very, controversial character, and he was even saying, he goes, I don't think it's multiculturalism. And that shocked me because everything I've ever heard of Tommy Robinson was like, oh yeah, he just wants a white Britain. And then I'm listening to the guy talk about it. It's like, well, that's not what he's saying. He's, in fact, one of the reasons why I understood he kind of left some of the organizations he was previously associated with, which were some pretty shady organizations, was in part because he would bring his ethnic friends to the meeting and they weren't invited. And it was like, whoa, this is not what I'm down for. But he'd even said, I'm not trying to get you to like pick a side on this, but it was just shocking to me to hear someone like Tommy Robinson, which has been caricatured a certain way, say, no, I don't got a problem with immigration. I got a problem with this type of immigration because it refuses to assimilate. And do you think that more and more, I mean, I'm seeing this more and more in the UK, at least from what we see in American media and social media. Actually, not in American media, it's what we see on social media. But it also seems like it's happening in Germany, it's happening in France, and there seems to be a pretty straight line being drawn toward it's immigrants from Islamic countries and cultures who identify that way. Their primary source of their identity is Islam, that are just not interested in assimilating. And I feel like for the first time in my lifetime, it's become okay to say that. Do you think that's just because the evidence has become so overwhelming?
Yeah, I think the issue is when you look at everything that has been happening through the UK with the protests after October 7th. Literally the next day, there was a protest. Well, it wasn't a protest. It was a celebration of the slaughter of over 1,000 Jewish people. You look at the grooming gangs, and the part of the reason, and people actually don't address this enough, as to why there hasn't been an inquiry and why we haven't spoken about it and governments haven't addressed it, and people talk about political correctness. There was a large-scale cover-up as to what was happening. And if we're going to have a real inquiry, and we're going to have a proper discussion about it, which we haven't yet, then the reality is some people are going to be exposed as knowing what was going on, at best turning a blind eye, and at worst actively encouraging, if not profiting from it. So there's a very, very, very dark aspect to the grooming gangs that we haven't yet addressed, because there's local councillors involved in this, local councils, local politicians, police force, every schools, care homes. This is a rot and a cancer which goes right to the heart of our establishment and right to the heart of the systems of government throughout our country. And that's a part of the grooming gangs that we haven't yet spoken about, because once we do, you're going to see a lot of people, particularly people now who are, doing very well in politics and other areas of life, who started off in those, local councils 20 or so years ago, or, and they were a police officer, and now they're at the head of a particular police force. But 20 or so years ago, they were either involved, or they were negligent, or they just simply turned a blind eye to this.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, coming back to the conversation of how do you move forward, which is what you're about, right? Is I think part of the reason that the things that Francis just described happened is that because supremacist ideologies are intolerable to our mindset, we don't know what to do with the supremacist ideology. We have interviewed a number of victims of these grooming gangs who all explained that the reason that they were targeted, and while they were being abused in the way that they were, their race and ethnicity, and in some cases Christianity, was the reason that their perpetrators felt entitled to behave this way. Because the Islamist worldview, or maybe in some cases the Muslim worldview, I don't know exactly, is supremacist in nature. So that being the case, well, you are bringing people in large numbers who believe they are superior to you. If I believed I was superior to the culture of Britain when I came from Russia, I would not integrate. Why would you integrate into an inferior culture? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So I think this is interesting, because when you grow up in a classical liberal tradition where you believe in, again, equality before the law, equality before God, freedom of religion, right, which leads a lot of people to say, well, we have to treat all religions equally. Okay, well, what if not all religions are willing to integrate with your society equally? Does that mean you just have to do it regardless? This is the part where I think this category 2 and this category 3 are really fighting and trying to figure out the classical liberal tradition. That's what we have to remain true to. We just got to go back to our roots. And a lot of the people in category 3 are going, our roots got us here. Maybe not in their entirety, not saying that throw the baby out with the bathwater, but as I listen to voices like, Carl Benjamin, where he says, yeah, classical liberalism works really, really well for the people that invented it, like it, and have lived in it, more or less for, hundreds and hundreds of years. We're not allowed to think that. And I feel like...
Well, hold on, who says that? Who says we're not allowed to think
the
that?
The left acts as if you're betraying certain fundamental principles. And even some people in the classical liberal tradition behave as if you're betraying.
But this is why the distinction I made earlier is very important. I do not believe that if you were to take a person from rural Pakistan, pluck them out of their crib, transport them into an American family, and they were raised here surrounded by normal Americans, that there is something about the fact that they were born in Pakistan that makes them immune to imbibing the traditions of classical liberalism, all other things being equal, right? It's possible. The problem is that's not how immigration happens, right? So it's not, the problem, I'm not saying Carl says this, but the problem with the reason that this becomes such a difficult thing to discuss is that people often use very unnuanced language when they're talking about it. And what they say, well, people from this part of the world can't ever, well, that's just factually incorrect. They can. Right?
They have.
They have, right? So what we should be talking about, really, I think it's really a lot simpler than the conversation we've been having, to be honest. What we should be saying is this. We need immigration if we are going to have it. And America, in my experience, is the most pro-immigrant country in the entire world. Like, if I talk to people in this country about, there was a time when we thought about moving here, and I tell people, oh, we're thinking of that, but we'd love to have you.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't exist in most other places, genuinely, right? So America's, but all you got to say is we want immigration that makes our country better. That's what we want, right? And then you go, well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is we're looking for cultural compatibility. I love that President Trump is going after Nigeria right now over the massacres of the Christians. I love that, right? Because basically what has happened for the last God knows how many decades, maybe centuries, is Christians around the world have been terribly treated, and no one gives a because we care about the civil war there, the Sudan, right? You want to think about people who are coming. Well, are they going to well, Christians are probably more compatible with this country than Buddhists.
Yeah.
Right? It's not because I'm against Buddhists. It's because America's a Christian country, right? So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect might be the cultural values of the place they're coming from, their level of education. Their involvement or not involvement in terrorism. These are pretty basic things, right? Yeah. So you go, what is an immigration policy? Forget political correctness. What is an immigration policy that benefits America? I would imagine that means you bring in people who are broadly compatible with your cultural values, who are smart, who are entrepreneurial, who are driven, who've got whatever traits you'd want your daughter to marry. Let's have the same approach to immigration.
And so, and here ends up becoming I'm just going to pose it as a question. They'll say, okay, but you're just doing that as a dog whistle, because what you really want are white people, because the sort of immigrants that you're going to get that actually meet with the characteristics that you just mentioned are more likely to come from Western European countries than they would be from Sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, I also want people who are alive and not dead. That doesn't mean I'm against dead people. I am not saying we need more white immigration. I think I've laid out a pretty convincing case of the type of immigration you want. And by the way, there are lots of Christians in India who are brown people, right? So I think it's a silly argument, and it is. That's why you're putting it to me. I just think it's very simple. You want people to come who are going to make your country better, and you want to do everything possible to not put people in your country who are going to make it worse. And yes, there are ways to tell that in advance. In the same way that you have a front door in your house, and you let people in who you think are going to be good people to have in your house, and you do everything you can up to and including arming yourself with weapons to make sure that people you don't want in your house don't come in.
No, I think there's I think making the distinction between cultural traits versus ethnic traits is incredibly important. I remember I shocked when I was in college after the military. I was in a very, very diverse college class, and it was an English class. It's always an English class. They talk about things that have nothing to do with the actual subject matter. But they were talking about the professor, white liberal professor, kept saying black culture. And I remember asking, I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, can you give me what you mean by culture? He goes, and he goes, well, what do you mean by it? I said, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Bell, but we can use it's society's attempt to come up with a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that we face. He's like, oh, okay, we'll use that. I said, okay, good. So now that we have a definition that we're all keen on, what do you mean black culture? And he looks at me and goes, what do you mean? I said, okay, I'll just say it, Professor. I don't think there's any such thing. Now the class is looking at me I said, what I mean by that is that I don't think there's a monolithic culture that is assigned to you by virtue of the amount of melanin you have. I said, for you to believe that, for you to say black culture, what you would have to agree to is that if I asked one of those existential questions to a black man in Los Angeles, Detroit, Birmingham, Alabama, London, Paris, and Johannesburg, I'd get the same answer because they're all black. Then the students all looked at him. I was like, yeah, got you. but I think I think one of the problems that we run into, and this is part of that fight that's taking place, is that obviously you have different civilizations that have grown up in particular areas that generally have certain skin colors that develop cultural institutions. And so the visual thing of I can tell, white versus black versus Asian or what, The visual thing ends up becoming the quickest distinction to make assumptions, to engage in heuristics about what that person is likely to believe about certain questions. And I think part of what has frustrated so many people is this idea, like, am I not allowed to use this heuristic? And I think what you're saying is you can use the heuristic, but it's not determinative. You can't say because you're this skin color, you think that. But if your initial inclination is, well, because you come from this particular culture, you're likely to believe these things, that is not an inappropriate assumption as long as you don't let it crowd out new evidence.
Well, and I would also think it's important to add that there are additional categories that are essential to consider in that calculation. So, for example, I was at a dinner in London a few weeks ago. Sat next to me was a Pakistani guy, right? One of the most intelligent, educated, impressive, balanced, sensible human beings that I've ever talked to in the last year. Great guy, right? But he doesn't come from a village in Pakistan. He has a PhD. He came from an English-speaking family. These are all other data points that are likely to tell you something about compatibility with a culture that is more highly educated, in which people, there's no cousin marriage, so there's not the clannishness that often comes with the village. And by the way, it doesn't just apply to Pakistan. Like, I grew up in Russia and Ukraine. I can tell you people in Ukrainian villages don't behave in the same ways that PhD professors in Kiev do. This is a pretty universal thing, right? So I honestly think we've been pretending for a long time, because woke idiots have sort of made us, that we don't know a lot of the things that we actually really do know. And I think things like education, where you're from, what your family background is, what your dad's job was, what your mum's job was. If you get that information about somebody, particularly with AI, I bet you can come up with some pretty good correlations about your likely behavior, your likely attitude to women's rights, your likely attitude to homosexuality, your likely attitude to the West. And by the way, we're sitting here earlier today, we recorded an interview with Daniel DiMartino, who's a Venezuelan, right, who's fled communist Venezuela. He seems to be very compatible with America to me, right? Like, we can tell a lot of these things if we just dare to look.
Well, it's funny. I've again, in my never-ending quest to make sure I'm unelectable in the future, I once said I actually agree with the woke that white people are the problem. We just disagree on which white people. I told somebody once. I said Nick Freitas' immigration plan probably doesn't look anything the way the woke think it does. Because I feel like I have far more in common with somebody who, like, I have far more in common with somebody who's working their butt off in Guadalajara right now, that just wants to be able to raise their kids, go to church, love their wife, work their job, own a house. I got way more in common with that guy than the American that was born here that's teaching at the gender studies department at Cal Berkeley. Like, if you wanted to do a 1-for-1 trade, I'd be totally cool with that, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a home defense weapon and it is locked up in a safe somewhere, guess what? You don't have a home defense weapon, right? Because a true home defense weapon is one that you can access quickly, effectively, and under stress. And that is where the StopBox Pro comes into play. You can see me operating mine right here. And as you can see, it is incredibly simple and it works every time. Why? Because it's 100% mechanical. That's right. It uses an ingenious push button design, which does not rely on batteries, does not rely on power, does not rely on some sort of strange code you're going to forget in a stressful moment. Nope. You just reach over, open it up with one hand, access your firearm, and make sure that whoever just broke into your house has a real bad day. And right now, you can get 10% off your entire order. That's right. Go to stopboxusa.com/MTA10. That's stopboxusa.com/MTA10. And when you do that, they're also going to give you access to their special buy one, get one free deal for their StopBox Pro, the very same one you just saw me use. So go check that out. Get your 10% off. That's once again, stopboxusa.com/MTA10. Go check it out.
Right? Despite the fact that one of those people is going to look a lot like me and one of them is not. And so I do think that's an important distinction. Here's the question I want to ask about, okay, so what do we do about this? Because here's the other problem. There are elements within classical liberalism. I think you've done a good job displaying them here. It's like, look, it's not about, no, I'm not trying to exclude people that don't look like me. But I do think we should be careful about letting people in who think diametrically opposed to what we think. right? It's not reasonable to assume that that cultural clash is going to be beneficial for either side. So, okay, we've separated the kind of the racial component from the cultural component because they are distinct. But now we get into the issue of, okay, practical application. I'm looking at places like the UK right now, and again, if I look at the UK and I look a little bit more into our future, because let's face it, the United Kingdom, England specifically, more than any other country in the world, is what influenced the United States, our cultures, our customs, our religion, it just did. And I'm looking at various things that are currently going on, and it does seem like there was a welcoming of people into the country that, again, have no love for English culture or even broader British culture, because like those are, so my question is okay, if we want to maintain that elements of that classical liberal structure, which are very organic to England. One could say that most of them are originated, developed, and nurtured in England, and then exported outward. How do you deal with the problem that we currently have? What mechanisms do you use that preserve the principles you want to protect without going into some of these areas where, because this is the debate, right? Like if we accept certain arguments that are currently being made, do we actually lose the thing that we're trying to save in the process?
I don't think if you have sorry, Francis, I'll just say very quickly and then you dive in. I don't think you lose anything if you have a points-based immigration system in which you get a tick for being a genuine Christian, not someone who says they're a Christian, in which you get a tick for education, in which you get a tick for some kind of skill or trade or whatever, in which you get a tick for other indicators of cultural compatibility and ability to contribute, right? You get a point for this, you get a point for this, you get a point for this.
But you think it would be okay to do like a point for like, are you a Christian? Or what is your religion and whether
And I'm not saying it would be, you wouldn't also include other religions. I don't know that Buddhists are incompatible with America. I don't think they are, as far as I understand. I don't know much about Buddhism, right? I don't know. I think Jews are pretty compatible, historically speaking, based on what we've seen. I don't see any. I see some people being hostile to Hindus, but I don't see that being as a result of their religious incompatibility. Right?
One of the things I heard somebody explain on this that I thought was interesting is they say a religion can be political or it can be proselytizing.
Yeah.
But if it's both, you're going to run into issues. So what they were saying is Judaism's political, but it's not proselytizing. They're not trying to convert you to Judaism. Christianity is proselytizing, but it's not political in the sense that they're not trying to set up a Christian caliphate, thing. But Islam is both political and proselytizing, and it believes it is justified in doing so through the sword.
And yet there are Muslims like Ed Hussein, who sat in this very chair a few months ago, who's great for America. He's moved to America and makes it so. But Ed's I think doctoral supervisor was Roger Scruton. Yeah. Right.
My friends, loyal Americans, cops, soldiers that I serve. I mean, these guys put it all on the line to defend this country. Absolutely love this country. But there's also a difference in the way they interpret their faith versus the distinction we might call between someone who is a Muslim versus an Islamist.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is, I actually don't think this is nearly as difficult as people like to pretend, provided that you're prepared to say, no, we're not going to treat everybody differently because not everybody is the same.
Yeah.
And if your name is Jihad, maybe that should be minus 1 point. The latest synagogue attack in the UK was a guy called Jihad. Maybe if your son is called Jihad, let's do a little extra checking. I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, it's.
Sorry, Francis. I've been banging on this for ages.
No, it's Look, I'm going to be brutally honest with what's going on in the UK. I'm incredibly pessimistic about what's happening in the UK, simply because we are not able to have the conversation. When it comes to mainstream politicians, we're having the discussion about what is actually happening in the country, what is happening with Islamic extremism, what is happening with terrorism. We don't have the conversation. I'll give you an example. 2022. It's a man I actually knew. Is a man called Sir David Amess. Sir David Amess was a beloved Tory MP, Member of Parliament. He was stabbed to death by an Islamic extremist in what is called a surgery, and that is where It's basically
It's constituency office.
It's constituency office. A man came in, stabbed him to death. Then very next day, everybody in the newspapers or on TV was talking about how we need to combat online hate.
Good God.
You know, and to say that is despicable doesn't even begin to cover 1/8 of what actually happened.
Yeah.
It is cowardice of the highest and most profound order. We simply do not have the guts, the mettle, the ability to actually stand up and go, we have a very real problem in our society with a minority of the Islamic population who are extremists, who want to destroy, end our civilization and our way of life, and they will do whatever they can and whatever it takes in order to achieve that goal. But we're not prepared to talk about it. We're not prepared to have a conversation about it. We can barely have a conversation about whether we should have borders in our country. And until our political class has been gutted and we get a new political class in who have actually got some backbone and are willing and able to have this conversation, I'll be honest with you, I don't have a lot of confidence, Nick. I don't actually have a lot of belief in that anything is going to change. And I haven't actually spoken about this. I talked to Konstantin about this and a few other people. But
I call him a racist in a bit.
But my outlook for my country is actually pretty bleak as a result.
Yeah. But this is why for America, you have a unique opportunity. Because we have made all the mistakes that you are likely to make if you carry on the way you've been going.
Well, there's a lot of, there's the one thing that I'm a very, very proud American, but I am ashamed of the fact that a lot of these ideas were exported from here. Now that's not to say that people like Herbert Marcuse and Antonio Gramsci and all these others, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I mean, we can all dump on the French here, right? Like,
We're down for that.
But a lot of kind of this latest manifestation of critical theory, critical race theory, queer theory, wokeism, as we colloquially referred to. Here's the next part that we'll kind of like conclude on, because I think how we answer this next one really draws distinctions between the two categories and talks about, okay, what is going to be necessary and how do we do it without losing ourselves in the process? Because I think this is important. The immigration one is actually a little bit easier because there's a distinction. It's the people that have come and have broken the law, and there's already legal mechanisms. Even if we have politicians that are not willing to use it, there's legal mechanisms. There's a distinction in people's minds that makes it easier to make that argument. What do you do about the people that allowed it to happen, that are encouraging it to happen? Because in many respects, that's your fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is we have, it's again, we want to call it the woke mind virus. You want to call people that within your civilization that have fully adopted, embraced, and are now implementing it. And let's face it, they have done a great job of conducting the march through the institutions that Gramsci and others talked about. How do you prevent those people from maintaining power or keeping it in the future? Is there a legal mechanism you use to that? Is there a form of government power that you implement? Or is it just making better arguments?
Well, you did it last year, didn't you?
With Trump?
The election of President Trump, again, for a second time in 2024, showed you that this entire worldview is completely bankrupt, right? The way he won, it was overwhelming, overwhelming in every respect. And that, to me, was a clear sign, and you see it now in the sense that Mamdani isn't actually woke. Have you noticed this? He doesn't talk about race at all. He doesn't talk about those issues. So the kind of identitarian worldview has been largely defeated on the left. You win the argument, and you win elections. And that is, what else are you going to do? Get rid of half of America because they don't agree with?
No. It's well, and I'll give you.
Can I just add a point as well?
Yeah.
The problem isn't the ideology. Ideologies only flourish when societies are weak, which ours has become. It isn't the people propagating these ideas or spreading them. That's not the real issue. The real issue is the fact that we have a courage deficit amongst our elites and amongst our leaders who see this lunacy being spread, who see nonsensical things being said, like a man can become a woman, a woman can become a man, I can identify as a ferret, or whatever it may be. And we don't do anything. We don't say, hang on a minute, that is ridiculous. No. Because we do not have the spine or the backbone or just the certainty to actually stand up and say that these things that are being said, not only are they patently false, not only are they scientifically untrue, they're deeply toxic, and if imbibed on a civilizational level, is effectively what I would call it's civilizational dry rot. It will rot your culture and your society from the inside.
But this is why I say that last year was a good example of actually hundreds of millions of people did stand up and did say, I don't agree with this. And those battles, some of them have been won, both in our country and in America. So I think the answer is this wokeness of this kind, and including similar movements on the right, they are self-sabotaging by the very nature of the fact that they are not compatible with reality. The reason wokeness was defeated is it doesn't make sense and it doesn't work. And millions of people voted for a man they despised and hated, actually. Let's be honest, right? A lot of the people that voted for President Trump in 2024 called him all sorts of names in 2016, up to and including his vice president.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, why did that happen? Partly it's about, proximity to power and all of that, but partly it's about the fact that people saw that the choice they had was either President Trump, with whom they had some reservations, or an ideology that opened the border of their country and it was chopping genitals off children, right? So all of these, and likewise, the super fringy, fashy kind of part of the young right, they are going to be equally alienating to the vast majority of the American public, which is one of the reasons I've been so vocal about pushing them away as well. So my view is, actually people are discovering their courage, speaking up, and also something you talk about, Nick, which is raising children, having children, raising them, and outbreeding this craziness.
I have joked that we could win it all in one generation because we have more kids and we don't abort them.
Right. And then you educate them.
And we educate. That's the other part. We let them. When you let the other side educate your children, you can't be surprised with the results. Okay, this is my last question, but seriously, this is the last one. So here's where it comes down. Here's where it comes down to brass tacks. Okay, because from what I'm hearing, and you guys, please feel free to correct me if I'm misinterpreting this. The argument I'm hearing here is more of like, look, the institutions that we have, the ideas that we have are solid. And what we need to do is do a better job of protecting and fighting for those institutions, as they exist within that system. I'm hearing a little bit more of, hey, I started over here in category 1, and now I'm actually listening to some of these things on category 3 where we might have to take a heavier hand.
For Britain, though, remember.
For Britain.
Not for America.
For Britain.
It's important.
Yeah, for Britain.
It's an important distinction because our problem has already happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have a chance to stop it.
So here's my question. As you look at the English political tradition, what would you prefer me to say? What would be more appropriate, the British or the English?
Whatever.
Because I realize there's a distinction here.
We're not woke.
Okay. The British political tradition, cultural tradition. You have parliament, you have your elections, you have your processes, you have your courts. Is there anything that would be a major departure from what's currently being offered, maybe even by reform or whatnot, a major thing that you would advocate for, or any significant structural change to the way that the government currently operates or is structured in Britain that you guys would change? Are there 2 or 3 examples of, if I gave you guys power tomorrow and you guys could just make these things happen, what are the 2 or 3 significant things that you would change that would either work within the current system or maybe even change the way some elements of the current structure works?
You mean structurally? You don't mean stop immigration or whatever?
It can be both. It could be just stopping immigration. But if there is a structural one, I'd want to know that too.
Right. Well, you close the border to illegal immigration, which is what President Trump did basically on day one in this country, right? Then, if Reform get elected, what they need to do, and they know this, they need to. The entire country is basically run by bureaucrats. We call it the civil service. Which, as we have discussed with numerous people, including several former prime ministers of our country on our show, effectively, when you get into power, you find out that the levers that you're trying to use, they don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
it's because someone has come in below and cut off the cables that connect them to everything else. So when you try and send a message through this behemoth of government bureaucracy, it never gets to where you're trying. So the first thing you have to do is get rid of all the people who are standing in your way.
This is what we're trying to do with Doge in the United States.
That's right.
And things, yeah.
That's right.
We weren't very successful.
No.
We tried. We're better than nothing.
Yeah. So you try and get rid of that. And if you can, that obviously allows you then to do everything else. Until you've done that, and nothing else is going to work. But the other thing is, and again, I think there's a lot of inspiration for Britain to take from the Trump administration, is there's a lot of this kind of weird elite consensus where it's, I remember we had Rory Stewart on the show, who's a former Conservative government minister. And we talked about, I know this is all like insider baseball details,
please.
But it is kind of important. There is this European Convention on Human Rights, which is the legal mechanism by which we are prevented from enforcing our own border.
Yeah.
And when we dug with him about why he didn't want to review that or have some kind of change to it, he sort of went, well, then we'd be like Russia, then we'd be like this. And there is this kind of thing where they all accept that you can't change this, and then when they leave office, they all say we must immediately leave this ECHR thing that I told you 3 months ago we can't leave.
Yeah.
Right? So you actually have to take on some of these ideas and just go, we don't give an F. We're just doing this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can sue us, you can do whatever, but we're going to take the boats and we're going to tow them back to France.
Yeah,
and if the French get upset, that's a benefit.
It's the old Andrew. I mean, this was not done in a good way. It led to the Trail of Tears. But when Andrew Jackson said, "Well, the Supreme Court's made their decision. Now let's see them enforce it," you're basically saying that there needs to be enough strength. I mean, this is part of what I think many Americans thought Brexit represented was once again the UK reasserting control over its own future and telling the rest of Europe, like, look, when it comes to trade, great, but you're not going to tell us how to run the internal policies of our country. And you're saying that's still, so that would be a major departure you would advocate for, is essentially looking at some of these treaties with the rest of Europe and saying, yeah, no thanks.
Sorry, I didn't see you there. If you've ever watched any of my reels and thought to yourself, where does Nick get all of those incredible coffee mugs? Well, look no further. You can get them with us. That's right. You can go to shop.nickjfreitas.com and find an assortment of some of my favorite coffee mugs with all of this snarkiness that I usually deliver on camera. That's right. If you've ever been watching one of my videos and thought to yourself, oh my gosh, that would be perfect for my husband, my wife, my child, or yourself, you can go to shop.nickjfreitas.com and picking them up now. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Coffee mugs are just the tip of the iceberg. We've got other stuff as well. And let's face it, Christmas is coming up. So get over there right now. Shop.nickjfreitas.com. Check it out. See you there.
So that would be a major departure you would advocate for, is essentially looking at some of these treaties with the rest of Europe and saying, yeah, no thanks.
Well, right. And just so you understand how badly Brexit has failed, when I came to Britain in 1995, net annual immigration into Britain, 95-96, was 55,000 people a year. That's the number of people who come to Britain illegally every year.
Good gosh.
Right. That's the level of the problem. So turn the fucking boats around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love how everyone's in it. You look at this concept of asylum, not to go down this path, but you look at this concept of asylum, you're supposed to get to the first safest country you can arrive at. And it's amazing how unsafe all of the European continent is, that they've got to make it all the way to the UK.
Yeah.
Anything structural or major?
The complete and total destruction of the Conservative Party. Number one.
Okay.
I'm with Peter Hitchens on that. I don't know if you know Peter.
Yeah.
I'm with Peter Hitchens on that. It's a party that pretends to be conservative, but for 14 years, in the words of its now leader, it talked right and governed left. So it effectively, for basically a decade and a half, gaslit an entire nation.
Yeah.
They need to be taught a lesson that you cannot do that to the electorate. You cannot be allowed to get away with that. And they need to be nowhere near power for at least 3 election cycles to clean out all the people who are in that government, and so that they actually learn that when they come back into power, they are the servant of the people, and they are not there to smile and grin at the voter and then do the complete opposite. Promise to tackle immigration and then open the doors and ensure wave after wave of immigration. It's unacceptable. And I'd say as well, if you are found to aid, abet, or take part in any form of terrorism, that is an automatic life sentence with no hope of parole in a supermax prison. I sound really right wing now, don't I?
I think you're in box 3, mate.
Well, gentlemen, thank you again for willing to do this, willing to share your perspective. Again, I really, as a proud American, I really hope that the UK finds their way through this, because so much of the world owes a great deal to the English tradition, to the United Kingdom. It has been a shame to see kind of the legacy of the UK just get disparaged by its own politicians and representatives, and we see similar things here in the United States. But at least from the outside looking in, it has been interesting to see what it looks like as a resurgence of patriotism coming back, and pride in one's culture and history, and you certainly are owed that pride. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Let us know what you thought of this conversation. Please comment, like. Also, go ahead and check out the link in the description. If you'd like to join the community and be a part of the larger conversation that we have, that's the best way to do it. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.